You think you've got it rough when your heater breaks down for a day. Let me paint you a picture of what winter was really like back in medieval times. Imagine bone-chilling cold that seeps into your marrow with no modern insulation, no central heating, and death lurking around every corner. The winter months in medieval Europe weren't just uncomfortable. They were a savage battle for survival that claimed countless lives each year. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from. So, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. So, let the modern world and its noises just fade away. All right, let's head back to medieval Europe during the Little Ice Age. Trust me, it's going to be quite a ride. But first, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows. Pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. So, congratulations. You just woke up in a small village in northern England in the year 1350. The first thing you notice is light. There isn't much of that on this gray November morning. It's the cold, a biting, damp chill that makes your bones ache. Not like your comfy bed right now, with its temperature-controlled environment and fluffy duvet. Your eyes flutter open to rough-hewn timber beams overhead, blackened by years of smoke. The air smells of wood smoke, damp straw, the faint, lingering sweetness of old herbs, and the earthy, almost warm scent of the cattle penned in the adjacent section of your home. You're lying on a straw-filled mattress set on a simple wooden frame, piled with scratchy woolen blankets and whatever furs your family has managed to acquire. The cold has crept in during the night, and your breath forms small clouds in the dim light. As you roll over, straw crunches beneath you. Your siblings and perhaps a grandparent are huddled nearby for warmth. Outside, the wind whistles through the bare trees, and frost paints intricate, feathery patterns on the small, unglazed window openings, covered with oiled parchment or wooden shutters. You can hear that faint whistle as the wind finds the tiny gaps in the wattle-and-door walls. Time to get up. There's no hitting the snooze button. Staying in bed only prolongs the inevitable and wastes precious daylight. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, your bare feet meeting the packed earth floor. It's cold, damp, and unforgiving. You quickly pull on your clothes, which are coarse and practical. A linen undertunic, a thick woolen tunic over that, and leggings held up with leather straps. Your shoes are simple leather turn shoes, probably stiff with the cold. There's no variety, no fashion statement. Every piece of clothing is about one thing: survival. Your mother is already up, tending to the hearth in the center of the single room that serves as your kitchen, living room, and bedroom. The fire is the heart of the home, the single source of heat and light. It's a precious, guarded thing. Letting it go out during the night is a disaster. She coaxes the embers back to life, adding dried peat and precious pieces of wood. The smoke, thick and acrid, fills the room before slowly finding its way out through a small hole in the thatched roof. Your eyes sting and water, a constant winter companion. Breakfast isn't a leisurely affair with coffee and toast. It's a small bowl of pottage, a thick stew of whatever grains and vegetables are left from the autumn harvest oats, barley, maybe a few leathery carrots or turnips. It's bland, but it's hot, and it fills your belly, providing the energy needed for the day's grueling work. Meat is a luxury, reserved for feast days or a lucky hunt. This morning, it's just a plain, hearty potjui. Quickly, standing near the fire, trying to absorb as much warmth as you can before heading out. Your father is already outside, his breath pluming in the frigid air as he checks on the animals. The livestock: a cow, a few sheep, maybe a pig jar, the family's most valuable assets. Their survival through the winter is just as critical as your own. They are housed in one end of your longhouse, their body heat providing a small but noticeable amount of warmth to the human dwelling. Their health means milk, wool, and eventually, meat. Losing an animal to the cold or to starvation is a catastrophic blow. The work of winter is relentless and focuses on conservation. There's wood to be chopped, a constant, back-breaking task. The forest is a few miles away, and you and your brothers will spend hours felling trees with heavy axes, then hauling the logs back to the village on a crude sled. Every piece of wood is precious fuel. There are tools to be mended, fences to be repaired, and leather to be treated. Inside, the women are just as busy. They spin wool into yarn, weave cloth on a simple loom, and preserve what little food remains. They might be salting fish caught before the rivers froze, or grinding the last of the grain into flour with a heavy stone corn. There are no idle hands. Idleness in winter is a death sentence. The days are brutally short. By mid-afternoon, the weak, gray light begins to fade, and the world is plunged back into a deep, oppressive darkness. The wind picks up, howling like a hungry wolf, and the temperature plummets. Everyone retreats back inside, huddling once more around the meager fire. This is the time for storytelling. An elder might recount tales of heroes and saints, or share local legends passed down through generations. These stories are more than entertainment. They are a vital part of the social fabric, a way to pass the time and keep spirits from flagging in the face of the endless dark. It's a brief respite from the gnawing cold and the constant worry about the dwindling food supply. Food is the central obsession of winter. The harvest of the previous year determines who lives and who dies. By February, the hunger gap begins to open up. The stores of grain are running low. The salted meat is nearly gone. The preserved vegetables are a distant memory. Hunger becomes a constant, dull ache in your belly. People grow gaunt, their faces thin and pale. The children are the most vulnerable, their small bodies less able to withstand the combination of cold and malnutrition. Illness is rampant. A simple cold can quickly turn into a fatal lung infection in the damp, smoky, and crowded living conditions. There are no antibiotics, no modern medicine. Herbal remedies and prayers are the only recourse. The village priest might visit, offering spiritual comfort, but he has little practical help to give. The church itself, built of stone, is often even colder than your own home. When death comes, it is a quiet, frequent visitor, an elderly grandparent who simply doesn't wake up one morning, a child who succumbs to a fever, a man who gets lost in a blizzard while searching for stray sheep. The ground is frozen solid, so burial is often impossible until the spring thaw. The bodies are wrapped in shrouds and stored in an outbuilding, a grim reminder of winter's toll. There is grief, of course, but there is also a grim acceptance. This is the natural order of things. Winter is the great color of the herd. But even in the darkest, coldest moments, there are glimmers of hope. The community pulls together. If one family's food runs out, neighbors might share a small portion of their own, knowing that they could be next. The shared struggle forges a powerful bond. And then there are the feast days, like Candlemas or the midwinter solstice, which break the monotony, and to forget, for just one night, the cold that waits outside the door. These moments of shared joy are a defiant shout into the teeth of the storm. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the first signs of spring appear. The days grow noticeably longer. The sun feels a little warmer on your skin. You might hear the first bird song, or see the first green shoots pushing their way through the muddy, thawing ground. The ice on the river begins to break up with a great groaning and cracking. A collective sigh of relief ripples through the village. You have survived. You have made it through another winter. The hunger will ease as the first wild greens become available and the fishing resumes. The work will change from survival to preparation, plowing the fields, planting the seeds for the next harvest. But the memory of the cold, the dark, and the hunger will linger, a shadow that will return when the days begin to shorten once more. Now, as you lie there in your warm, comfortable bed, feeling the soft blankets and the steady, quiet hum of your modern home, maybe take a moment, think about that peasant in 1350. Feel the phantom chill, smell the wood smoke, and hear the wind howling outside that small, daub-walled hut. The comforts we take for granted were the stuff of kings' fantasies. So pull that blanket up a little higher. Be grateful for the warmth, for the light at the flick of a switch, and for the food in your fridge. Imagine this. It's 4 in the afternoon, but pitch black outside. A biting wind howls, and the only light comes from a crackling fire in the center of your one-room home. This wasn't a scene from a fantasy novel. It was the reality for a medieval family settling in for a long winter night. For most of us, winter means cozy sweaters, hot chocolate, and central heating. But for our ancestors, it was a season of survival. The cold wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a constant, life-threatening presence. Let's journey back in time, peel back the layers of history, and discover how people in the Middle Ages truly endured the darkest, coldest months of the year. First, let's talk about the home itself. Forget insulated walls and double-glazed windows. A typical peasant house was built from wattle and daba, woven lattice of wooden strips covered in a mix of wet soil, clay, and straw. The floors were packed earth, maybe strewn with rushes for a bit of insulation, and the roof was thatch. These materials were what was available, but they offered minimal protection against the elements. Drafts were a constant companion. People would stuff any cracks they could find with rags, moss, or even dung to keep the precious heat from escaping. And that heat came from one primary source, the central hearth. This open fire was the heart of the home. Literally, it was used for cooking, providing light, and, of course, warmth. The entire family would huddle around it, the flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. But it was a smoky affair, with just a hole in the roof for a chimney. The air inside was thick with smoke, leading to chronic respiratory problems. It was a trade-off: endure the smoke or freeze in the dark. So, how did they stay warm when they weren't right next to the fire? Layers. Lots and lots of layers. Wool was the fabric of choice, and for good reason. It's an amazing natural insulator, and it stays warm even when it gets a little damp. A typical person would wear a linen undergarment, called a tunic or a chemise, and then layer woolen clothes on top. At night, they didn't have pajamas. They simply wore their undergarments to bed, piling on as many blankets, animal skins, and cloaks as they could find. Often, the whole family, and sometimes even their precious livestock, would sleep together in the same room to share body heat. Bringing a cow or a few sheep inside might sound strange to us, but that animal's body heat could make a real difference, raising the ambient temperature by a few crucial degrees. Plus, it kept the animals safe from predators and the freezing cold. It was a practical, if not exactly fragrant, solution. Now, let's talk about food. The summer and autumn were a frantic race against time to preserve enough food to last through winter. Without refrigeration, this required incredible ingenuity. Grains like wheat and rye were the foundation of the winter diet, stored carefully to protect them from dampness and pests. Vegetables like carrots, parsnips, and cabbages were stored in root cellars. Fruits were dried, and meat and fish were preserved through salting, smoking, or pickling. This meant the winter diet could be incredibly monotonous. Day after day, it was bread, porridge, and perhaps a thin vegetable stew called pottage. Fresh meat was a rare luxury. Usually, it was only available right after the autumn slaughter, when any animals they couldn't afford to feed through the winter were killed. The choicest cuts were preserved, but the offally organs and less desirable parts had to be eaten immediately. This would be a brief feast before the long stretch of salted and smoked rations began. Despite these hardships, winter wasn't all doom and gloom. It was also a time for community. With agricultural work at a standstill, people had more time for indoor activities. Women would spend their days spinning wool, weaving cloth, and mending clothes. Men would repair tools, carve wood, and prepare for the coming spring. And this was the time for storytelling. Gathered around the fire, families would share stories, legends, and folk tales. It was how history was passed down, how morals were taught, and how they entertained themselves through the long, dark evenings. Imagine a father telling his children not of the recent terrifying famines, but of the legendary frost fairs held on the frozen River Thames, a rare moment of joy and celebration in the heart of a harsh winter. These stories were a source of light in the darkness, a way to connect with the past and find hope for the future. The most critical task of the night was banking the fire. Starting a fire from scratch with flint and steel was a difficult, time-consuming process. So, it was crucial to keep the embers from the hearth alive overnight. The head of the household would carefully cover the glowing embers with a thick layer of ash. This ash blanket would insulate the embers, allowing them to smolder slowly until morning. In the pre-dawn chill, they could simply be uncovered, fed with some dry kindling, and coaxed back to life, bringing warmth and light to the home for another day. This simple act was a ritual of survival, a daily triumph over the cold. So, the next time you turn up your thermostat or flick on a light switch, take a moment to think about our medieval ancestors. Their lives during winter were a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring power of community. They faced challenges we can barely imagine, yet they found ways to survive, to care for one another, and even to find moments of joy in the darkest of seasons. Ever wondered how people survived the brutal winters of medieval England without central heating or modern insulation? Let's step back in time, into the small, single-room cottage of Thomas Fletcher, a typical peasant farmer. The air is frigid, but Thomas knows his first task is the most vital for his family's survival: reviving the fire. Moving silently across the packed earth floor, he kneels by the hearth. This isn't just about warmth, it's about life itself. Maintaining the fire is the most crucial skill of winter survival. He gently adds dry straw to the glowing embers, blowing softly until a tiny flame flickers to life. He carefully feeds it, first with small twigs, then larger kindling, until it's strong enough to take a proper log. This daily ritual is the difference between a comfortable morning and a dangerous, bone-chilling cold. The Fletcher home, like most peasant dwellings, is a marvel of ancient engineering, built with generations of wisdom. At roughly 20 by 15 feet, it's small enough to be heated by this single fire, yet large enough for the family and, sometimes, even their animals to shelter from the biting cold. The very design of the house is a survival tool. As the firelight grows, Thomas's wife, Emma, stirs. "Is it snowing still?" she whispers, peering through a crack in the shutters. Thomas confirms, "Nearly up to my knees." This might sound alarming, but it's actually good news. Why? Because snow is nature's insulator. A thick blanket of snow piled against the walls, whether by the wind or by hand, acts like a modern layer of insulation, trapping the precious heat from the fire inside the cottage. It's a simple but incredibly effective technique passed down through the ages. And what about the walls themselves? They are made of wattle and daub. This might sound primitive, but it's a clever composite material. A framework of woven sticks. The wattle is plastered over with a mixture of clay, straw, and sometimes animal dung. The daub, the straw, traps tiny pockets of air, much like modern fiberglass insulation, while the thick clay provides thermal mass. It absorbs the fire's heat during the day and radiates it back into the room slowly throughout the long, cold night. It's a low-tech solution that works surprisingly well. So, how warm did it actually get inside? Well, warm is a relative term. The Fletchers would consider the room comfortable at around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. For us, that might feel quite chilly, but for them, it was a cozy refuge from the harsh winter world outside. It's a testament to their ingenuity and resilience, using natural materials and accumulated knowledge to create a safe haven against the elements. It really makes you appreciate the comforts we have today, doesn't it? How did a medieval village survive the winter? It wasn't just about throwing another log on the fire. Winter was a relentless siege, and survival depended on months of careful, back-breaking preparation. Forget your modern conveniences. This was a battle against the cold, the dark, and the ever-present threat of starvation. Let's start with the absolute essential: firewood. "William, make sure the woodpile is covered properly," a father might say. The wood must stay dry. This wasn't just a chore. It was a sacred duty. Firewood meant a warm hearth, cooked meals, and a flickering light against the oppressive darkness of a medieval winter night. Families needed several cords of wood to make it through, and collecting it was a task that spanned the entire year. Throughout the spring, summer, and autumn, every able-bodied person would venture into the forest. They'd gather fallen branches and dead wood, a rite known as Isathover, granted by the local lord. But this rite came with a strict rule. You could not cut down living trees. To do so was a serious crime, punishable by severe penalties. This created a constant tension. What if you hadn't gathered enough? As winter's icy grip tightened, families faced a grim choice: freeze in their own homes, or risk the Lord's wrath by illegally cutting green wood. And the bitter irony: green wood, full of sap and moisture, burned poorly, producing more smoke than heat. It was a desperate, inefficient solution for a desperate time. Old-timers would tell stories of winters so harsh that people were forced to burn their own furniture, even parts of their homes, just to stay alive. As the days grew shorter and the feast of St. Martin, or Martinmas, arrived around November 11th, a different kind of preparation took center stage. A call would echo through the village. John Cooper wants to know if you'll help with the pig slaughtering today. Martinmas was the traditional time for slaughtering livestock. Why? Because there simply wasn't enough fodder hay and stored greens to keep all the animals fed through the long, lean winter months. Only the essential breeding stock and crucial working animals, like oxen for plowing, would be spared. The rest of the pigs, cattle, and sheep were destined for the winter larder. This was a communal event, a flurry of organized chaos. The squeals of pigs would fill the air as men worked together, their skills honed by years of practice. It was a messy, bloody business, but absolutely vital. Every single part of the animal was used. Nothing was wasted. The meat, the fat, the organs, even the blood, it all had a purpose. But slaughtering was only the first step. The real challenge was preserving the meat to last until spring without refrigeration. So, how did they do it? The primary methods were salting, smoking, and drying. Large cuts of pork and beef would be packed in barrels layered with coarse salt, drawing out the moisture that causes spoilage. Hams and sides of bacon would be hung high in the rafters of the main hall or in a special smokehouse, where a low, smoky fire would slowly cure the meat over days or even weeks. This process not only preserved the meat, but also added a deep, rich flavor that was highly prized. Sausages were another ingenious solution. Scraps of meat, fat, and organs were ground up, mixed with precious spices and herbs, and stuffed into cleaned intestines. These could then be smoked or air-dried, creating a long-lasting and portable source of protein. Think of it as the original meal prep, but on a life-or-death scale. While the men handled the butchering, the women of the village were engaged in equally crucial tasks. The bounty of the autumn harvest had to be secured. Root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, and turnips had been dug up from the garden plots and were carefully stored in cool, dry cellars or buried in sand-filled pits to keep them from rotting. Cabbages, a cornerstone of the medieval diet, were harvested just before the first hard frost and transformed into sauerkraut through fermentation, a process that not only preserved them but also added valuable nutrients. Grains, wheat, rye, barley, and oats were the true staff of life. After the harvest, the grain was threshed to separate it from the stalks and chaff. Then came the critical task of storing it. It had to be kept bone dry and, most importantly, safe from the constant threat of rats, mice, and insects. Grains were stored in well-built chests, clay-lined pits, or stone granaries. Losing your grain store to vermin or mold could mean famine for your family. This grain would be ground into flour throughout the winter to make the dense, dark bread that formed the bulk of every meal. Back in the cottage, the women and children gathered the last of the hardy herbs from their gardens. Rosemary, thyme, and sage weren't just for flavor. Their natural properties helped in preserving the meat and warding off spoilage. The apple harvest was also complete. The best unblemished apples were carefully wrapped, one by one, in straw or dry leaves, and stored in the coolest, darkest corner of the house. They had to be checked regularly for any sign of rot, as one bad apple could literally spoil the whole bunch. Lesser quality apples were pressed for cider, a staple drink, or boiled down into a thick, sweet paste that would keep for months. As the final preparations were made, a sense of grim determination settled over the village. The larder was as full as it was going to get. The woodpile was stacked high. The tools were mended. Now, the village turned inward, both literally and figuratively. Doors were shut tight against the wind, and families gathered around the hearth. Winter was a time for indoor work, spinning wool, weaving cloth, mending tools, and telling stories. It was a time of community, of shared hardship, and of hope for the spring to come. Surviving a medieval winter was a testament to human resilience, community cooperation, and a deep, intimate knowledge of the natural world. It was a relentless cycle of hard work that ensured the flicker of life would not be extinguished by the cold. It truly makes you appreciate the warmth of your own home, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back in time. And let me know in the comments which aspect of medieval survival you find most incredible. Have you ever wondered what it was like to wake up on a freezing winter morning, not in a centrally heated house, but in a simple medieval cottage? Let us travel back in time and spend a day with a family in the Middle Ages to see how they truly survived the cold. As dawn breaks, the first thing on everyone's mind is the fire. It's the heart of the home, the only source of heat. Imagine William and Margaret huddled close, trying to chase away the bone-chilling cold that seeped through the wattle and door walls all night, while the youngest, Agnes, is still buried under a pile of woolen blankets. The day's work has already begun. The men, Thomas and William, have an urgent task. We should check the roof, Thomas says. A heavy blanket of snow has fallen overnight, and that's a serious threat. Their house has a thatched roof made of thick layers of straw. It's fantastic for insulation, keeping the cottage surprisingly warm. But too much heavy, wet snow could cause the entire roof to collapse. Most medieval houses had steep roofs designed to help the snow slide off, but a major blizzard like this one requires a manual clearing. It's a cold, dangerous job, but absolutely essential for the family's survival. While they're outside, Emma and Margaret get started on the first meal of the day. Don't picture a big breakfast spread with eggs and bacon. For most medieval people, life revolved around two main meals. The morning meal was a simple, energy-boosting affair. Today, it's a steaming pot of porridge, made from oats or barley. If they're lucky, they might have a spoonful of precious honey to sweeten it. This hearty, warm meal is crucial fuel for the hard physical labor ahead. It wasn't about enjoyment. It was about getting the calories needed to function in the cold. Now, how do you dress to go clear snow off a roof when there's no high-tech winter gear? Emma reminds William, put on your leg wrappings before you go outside. This is the secret to medieval warmth. Layers, layers, and more layers. And the star material, wool. Wool was the miracle fabric of the Middle Ages. Unlike cotton, which becomes useless and cold when wet, wool retains its insulating properties, even when damp. Thanks to its natural lanolin oils, it could keep you warm in the often wet, slushy winters of Northern Europe. It was a true lifesaver. For a common man like William, winter fashion was all about function. He'd start with a linen undertunic, then layer 1 or 2 woolen tunics on top. On his legs, he'd wear loose trousers or hose. But the real game changer was the leg wrappings. These were long strips of woolen cloth, wound tightly from the ankle all the way up to the knee. Think of them as a combination of socks, leg warmers, and extra insulation, all in one. They provided an incredible amount of warmth and protection. Women like Emma and Margaret also relied on layers. They would wear a long linen underdress, topped with 1 or more long woolen gowns. The more layers, the warmer you'd be. And what about your head and hands? A huge amount of body heat escapes through your head, a fact medieval people understood well. Both men and women would wear woolen caps, coifs, or hoods, often pulled up over their heads to keep the wind and cold out. And for their hands, they wore mittens, not gloves. It might seem like a small detail, but it was a clever design. Keeping your fingers together in a mitten shares their warmth, making it much more effective at preventing frostbite than separating each finger in a glove. It was all about practical, shared warmth. After the roof is cleared and the morning meal is eaten, the day is far from over. Winter wasn't a time for hibernation. It was a time for indoor work. The firelight would have been dim, supplemented only by the weak winter sun coming through a small, shuttered window glass was a luxury reserved for the very wealthy in churches. In this cozy, smoky interior, the family would turn to their winter tasks. The men might be repairing tools, carving wood, or mending leather harnesses. Every piece of equipment had to be in perfect shape for the spring planting season. Nothing could be wasted, and self-sufficiency was key. For the women, winter was the season for textiles. Emma and Margaret would spend countless hours spinning wool into thread using a drop spindle, a simple but effective tool. This thread would then be woven into cloth on a loom. Making fabric was an incredibly time-consuming process. The clothes they wore, the blankets on their beds, everything was the result of months, if not years, of female labor. It was a constant, rhythmic part of winter life. As the sun begins to set, which happens very early in the winter, preparations for the main meal of the day would begin. This was the biggest meal, eaten in the mid-afternoon. It might consist of a thick stew, called pottage, simmering over the fire all day. It would be filled with whatever vegetables they had stored from the harvest: onions, leeks, cabbage, and dried peas. They might add some salted or smoked meat if they had it. This one-pot meal was a complete and nourishing dinner. As darkness falls completely, the family gathers once more around the fire. There's no electricity, no books for entertainment for common folk. This was a time for storytelling, for passing down family histories and local legends. It was a time for connection, huddled together in the small bubble of warmth and light, with the deep, silent cold of the medieval winter just outside their door. Living through a medieval winter was a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. It was a life dictated by the seasons, where warmth was a constant effort and every resource was precious. It wasn't just about having a good harvest. It was a desperate, ingenious race against time and decay. Let's explore the art of survival that was medieval food preservation. Imagine it's a cold November day in a medieval village. The air is thick with the smells of wood smoke and something more primal. This is the time for the annual slaughter, a crucial event that determined who would eat well and who might starve before spring. For families like the Fletchers, this day was the culmination of a year's hard work. Without modern technology, preventing food from spoiling was a constant battle. The number one weapon in their arsenal was salt. But here's the catch. Salt was incredibly expensive, a true luxury. Think of it like this. A family might have to trade a valuable handmade wool cloak, something that took weeks to weave, for just one small sack of salt. This wasn't for seasoning your dinner. This was for survival. Inside their small, smoky cottage, Emma Fletcher and her daughter Margaret would be hard at work. Half their precious meat would be salted. This was a painstaking process. They would rub every single cut of meat thoroughly with salt, getting it into every crevice, and then pack the pieces tightly in barrels filled with even more salt. The science behind this is simple but effective. The salt draws out moisture, creating an environment where the bacteria that cause rot simply can't survive. After a few weeks of curing, the meat would be rinsed and ready. It would be incredibly salty by our standards, but it would be safe to eat months later. A lifesaver in the dead of winter. But what about the rest of the meat? That's where the hearth comes in. The second major preservation technique was smoking. Pieces of meat would be hung high in the rafters of their home, directly above the central fire pit that burned day and night. The constant, rising smoke would slowly permeate the meat, curing and drying it over weeks. This slow process not only preserved the food, but also added a deep, smoky flavor that was a hallmark of medieval cuisine. It's a method we still use today for things like bacon and smoked salmon. But for them, it was a fundamental part of their food security. Beyond the meat itself, the principle was waste not, want not, taken to the absolute extreme. Every single part of the animal was used. The blood wasn't discarded. It was collected and mixed with oats or barley to make black pudding, a nutrient-rich food that could be cooked immediately. The intestines, once cleaned, became the natural casings for sausages. Another excellent way to preserve ground meat and scraps. The fat was carefully rendered down into lard for cooking or tallow for making candles to light the long, dark winter nights. Even the bones were treasured. They would be simmered for hours, or even days, to create a rich, nutritious broth that formed the base for countless soups and stews, extracting every last bit of nourishment. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was wasted. This whole process highlights a core aspect of medieval life that is easy for us to forget: community. This wasn't a world for individualists. The tasks of slaughtering and butchering were too large and labor-intensive for a single family to handle alone. Everyone pitched in. You'd see neighbors helping neighbors, sharing tools, sharing space, and sharing knowledge passed down through generations. Think of the two elderly sisters in the village, both widows. They couldn't manage a task like this on their own. So, the community would include their single pig in the collective slaughter. It wasn't charity. It was a system of mutual support. In return for that help, those sisters would spend their winter months spinning wool for the families who helped them, contributing their skills back into the community network. Everyone had a role, and everyone depended on everyone else. This intricate web of reciprocity was the social safety net of the time. As the short November day draws to a close, Thomas Fletcher would return home. His clothes would be stained, his hands raw from the cold and the hard work, but on his face, a look of profound satisfaction. He would bring the family's share of the meat, and seeing the larder begin to fill, a quiet relief would settle over the household. He might whisper to his wife, "Emma, we'll have enough," careful not to let the children hear the anxiety that always lingered just beneath the surface. The fear of not having enough food was a constant shadow hanging over every family. A bad harvest, a sick animal, a harsh winter any of these could spell disaster. But on this day, with the salting underway, the meat smoking in the rafters, and the community having pulled together once more, there is a sense of security. The pantry is stocked, not just with food, but with the hope of surviving another winter. It's a powerful reminder of the resilience, ingenuity, and deep-seated community spirit that defined life and survival in the medieval world. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It really gives you a new appreciation for that refrigerator in your kitchen, doesn't it? Have you ever wondered what it was really like to live through a medieval winter? Forget the romantic images of knights and castles we see in movies. For the average family, winter was a long, dark, and cold test of survival. Today, we're going to step back in time, into a humble, medieval home, and discover the ingenious ways people endured the harshest season of the year. Imagine a small, single-room house. The wind howls outside, but inside, there's a surprising amount of activity. "Agnes, bring your spinning to the fire," a mother named Emma might say to her youngest daughter. "Margaret, we'll work on the weaving." Winter was the season for indoor work, especially making textiles. The rhythmic thump of a loom and the gentle whir of a spinning wheel would have been the constant soundtrack of the season. While the men might venture out to care for livestock or mend tools, the women and children spent the short, dim days huddled near the hearth. Spinning, weaving, and sewing weren't just hobbies. They were essential tasks that clothed the family and could be done in the weak winter light. Every thread spun, every piece of cloth woven, was a small victory against the cold. Now, let's talk about a very different kind of roommate. The cow needs milking. A father, Thomas, reminds his son, William. While some animals were slaughtered before winter, a family would often keep a single milk cow. This cow lived in an attached shelter called a byre. And on the most brutally cold nights, guess who might be invited inside the main house? That's right, the cow. This wasn't just about being fond of their animals. It was a brilliant, low-tech heating solution. A large animal, like a cow, generates a surprising amount of body heat. In a small, enclosed space, a single cow could raise the indoor temperature by several crucial degrees. So, the scent that we might find strange today, a mixture of warm hay and livestock, was for them the comforting smell of shared survival. Even the chickens, tucked away in their corner coop, contributed their small share of warmth to the home. It was a symbiotic relationship, a community of humans and animals huddled together against the cold. As William returns with a pail of fresh milk, he might remark, The snow's good for something, at least. The buyer feels warmer, with the drifts against it. He's noticed another clever trick. The snow, which seemed like an adversary, could actually act as a natural insulator, piling up against the walls and helping to block the wind. His father would nod, adding, "Check for any gaps where the wind gets in. Pack them with straw if you find any." Drafts were the #1 enemy. Medieval homes didn't have glass windows like we do. Openings were covered with wooden shutters, oiled parchment, or even thin, stretched animal skins. These were far from perfect barriers. Cold air was a constant intruder. So, a never-ending winter chore was finding and plugging every single crack and crevice with whatever materials they had. Straw, moss, even rags. It was a constant battle to keep the precious warmth from escaping. As the day wears on, the focal point of the house, the hearth, becomes even more important. It's not just for warmth, it's the kitchen. Emma would be tending to a large pot hanging over the open fire. So, what was on the menu for a medieval winter lunch? Forget fresh salads and exotic fruits. Winter meals were all about preserved foods. Today's meal is pottage, the cornerstone of the medieval diet. It's a thick, hearty stew that's been simmering for hours, filling the room with the smells of earth and smoke. Inside the pot, you'd find ingredients that could last through the long winter months. A small piece of salted pork for flavor, dried peas, onions, and turnips. These vegetables came from a special place, the storage pit. This was another brilliant adaptation. A storage pit was essentially a simple, underground cellar, a hole dug into the earth and lined with straw. This kept root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, and turnips cool enough to prevent spoiling, but protected them from the freezing temperatures outside. Other vegetables, like cabbage, might be pickled or fermented, creating early versions of sauerkraut to preserve them for the lean months ahead. Every meal was a testament to the family's foresight and hard work during the harvest season. So, as this family gathers around the fire to share their simple, steaming meal of pottage, they aren't just eating, they are partaking in the fruits of their year-long labor. The cloth on their backs, the milk in their cups, the stew in their bowls, and the very warmth in the air were all products of their own ingenuity and resilience. Living through a medieval winter was a tough, relentless challenge. It required constant work, clever planning, and a deep understanding of the natural world. But it also fostered a powerful sense of community and interdependence, not just with each other, but with the animals they shared their lives and homes with. It's a powerful reminder that for most of human history, survival itself was the greatest achievement. Sound of a crackling fire and a howling wind. Have you ever complained about a chilly draft in your house? Well, imagine for a moment that you're living in the 14th century. Winter isn't just an inconvenience. It's a daily battle for survival. The sun sets by mid-afternoon, plunging your world into a long, dangerous night. This isn't just history. It's the lived reality for families like Thomas and Margaret's. Let's step into their small, Waterland-daub home. The only real source of warmth is the central hearth. Outside, a bitter wind howls, a constant reminder of the relentless cold that seeps through every crack and crevice. The savory aroma of pottage, thick stew of grains, and whatever vegetables they have left fills the small space. It's the promise of their one hot meal for the day. While the stew simmers, every member of the family is busy. There are no days off. Thomas sits by the fire's glow, his hands skillfully mending a wooden harrow. Even though the fields are frozen solid, spring planting is always on his mind. Tools must be ready. Every piece of equipment is vital, and a broken tool in spring could mean a smaller harvest in autumn, which in winter could mean starvation. It's a chain of survival, and every link matters. Margaret is at her loom, the rhythmic clack of the shuttle a constant sound in the cottage. Weaving isn't a hobby, it's a crucial task. The cloth she creates will become clothing, blankets, or goods to trade. In a world without central heating, layers of wool are the difference between shivering through the night and succumbing to the cold. She pauses, listening intently. The wind's picking up again, she murmurs. It's a simple observation, but it carries a heavy weight. A stronger wind means a colder house and a faster burning fire. Thomas glances at the dwindling woodpile. Every log is precious, chopped and hauled with immense effort. They're burning through it faster than he'd like. But what choice do they have? The cold is a predator. Every winter, it claims lives in the village, usually the elderly or the unwell. The danger is real and ever-present. We'll move the bedding closer to the hearth tonight, he decides. This isn't an unusual step. On the coldest nights, the entire family abandons their separate sleeping spots. They create a communal bed of straw pallets and furs right on the floor around the fire. A fortress of shared warmth against the oppressive night. They'll take turns all through the long hours of darkness to wake up and feed the flames, ensuring the heart of their home doesn't die out. By early afternoon, the pottage is ready. The family gathers around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flames. They hold their rough-hewn wooden bowls, the warmth seeping into their cold hands. They savor each spoonful, the simple, hearty flavor, a welcome comfort. Mealtimes are the bright spots in these bleak winter days, a brief pause in the constant labor of staying alive. It's a moment of connection, a shared ritual that strengthens their bond. Tell us more about the frost fair, Father, their daughter, Agnes asks, her eyes wide with anticipation. This is another kind of warmth of stories. Thomas smiles. He knows that stories can make the terrifying magical. They can transform a threatening winter into a season of wonder, at least for a little while. While he begins, his voice low and captivating. They say that in the Great Frost of 1309, the River Thames froze so hard you could walk across it like a road. Imagine that. A river of ice. The children lean in, captivated. Merchants set up their stalls right on the ice. He continues, selling hot spiced wine to warm your belly and roasting meats that sizzled over open fires. There were musicians and jugglers, and people held races on the ice. The whole city came out to celebrate. It's a beautiful image, a festival born from extreme cold. But what Thomas doesn't mention is the harsh reality behind the spectacle. He doesn't talk about the people who, during those same frost fairs, died from the brutal cold, from hunger, or from falling through the very ice they celebrated on. The stories are a shield, a way to find wonder in a world full of hardship. For children like Agnes, these tales help balance the fear of the howling wind with dreams of a frozen wonderland. After the meal, the brief respite is over. The family returns to their tasks, huddling close to the fire as the precious daylight outside begins to fade. The winter days are brutally short, and with the darkness comes the cold's renewed assault. Their world shrinks to the small circle of light cast by the fire. Their work, their conversations, their entire existence is tethered to these flames. This is the rhythm of their life in winter, a constant cycle of work, warmth, and watchfulness, fueled by simple food and held together by the strength of family. It's a stark reminder of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of nature, as harsh as challenges. So the next time you turn up your thermostat, take a moment to think of Thomas and his family. Their story isn't just a glimpse into the past. It's a testament to the fundamental human needs for warmth, food, and connection that tie us all together across the centuries. What was it really like to live through a medieval winter? Let us journey into the past and spend a day with a family like the Fletchers to find out. Imagine this. The sun is low, the air is sharp with frost, and the world outside is buried under a thick blanket of snow. Inside a small Waterland daub cottage, the Fletcher family is preparing for the long, dark evening ahead. Survival isn't just about individual strength. It's about community. We should check on Widow Thatcher, Emma says, setting aside her weaving. In a time before modern medicine, a cough could be a death sentence, especially for the elderly or those living alone. Neighbors looking out for one another wasn't just kindness. It was a crucial survival tactic. A person unable to maintain their fire could freeze in their own home without help. So, while Emma bundles up in an extra layer of wool to brave the cold and visit her neighbor, her husband Thomas prepares their own home for the night. Every task is deliberate, aimed at conserving energy and resources. He moves the livestock feed closer to the door, minimizing the number of trips he has to make into the freezing outdoors. Every step outside is a risk. He then checks their water barrel. It's not filled with fresh water from the well. Why? Because the path to the village well is a treacherous sheet of ice. Getting water becomes a dangerous expedition. Instead, the barrel is filled with melted snow, gritty, but life-sustaining alternative. It's a perfect example of adapting to the harsh conditions. Now, let's talk about light. As darkness falls, you might expect them to light a few candles. But candles were a luxury, incredibly expensive, and made from valuable tallow or beeswax. They were saved for emergencies, special occasions, or for the very wealthy. For the Fletcher family, and most people like them, the evening is lit by a rush. What's a rushlight? It's a beautifully simple, yet effective piece of technology. You take a common reed, or rush, peel it carefully to leave a single strip of pith, and then soak it in leftover animal fat. Once lit, it provides a dim, smoky light. By our modern standards, it would be almost impossible to read by, but it was enough. Enough to see the faces of your family, to mend clothes, or to perform simple tasks by the hearth. It was the sustainable, affordable lighting of the medieval world. Just as the last of the daylight fades, Emma returns, stamping the snow from her boots. The news is good. She's better today, she tells Thomas. Her grandson has come to stay with her until the snow melts. You can feel the collective sigh of relief. The community's safety net has worked. Widow Thatcher won't be alone. With the door barred against the howling wind, the family gathers around the one true source of warmth and light, the hearth. The fire is the heart of the home, the center of their world in winter. This is not a time for wasting fuel. The fire is carefully managed to last through the night. These evening hours are precious. With no television, no internet, and no bright lights to work by, this was the time for connection. It was a time for passing down skills and stories, for strengthening the bonds that held the family and the community together. We see Thomas teaching his son, William, how to carve a new handle for a tool. Their heads are bent together in the flickering firelight, the master passing his knowledge to the apprentice. This wasn't a formal lesson, it was life. Knowing how to make and repair your own tools was an essential skill when you could unjust pop to the store. Every object was valuable and had to be maintained. Meanwhile, Emma is showing her daughters a new stitch for darning socks. In a world where textiles were hand-spun, hand-woven, and incredibly labor-intensive to produce, you didn't just throw away a pair of socks with a hole in them. Darning was an art form, a way of extending the life of precious clothing for another season, and another, and another. The only sounds are the crackling of the fire, the murmur of their voices, and the endless howl of the wind outside. The fire casts long, dancing shadows on the rough plastered walls, creating a world of light and dark within their small sanctuary. Outside, the storm rages. New snow piles up against the cottage walls, adding another layer of insulation against the cold. But inside, the Fletcher family has created a pocket of warmth, life, and security. It's a testament to human resilience. This is the true rhythm of a medieval winter. It's a constant, delicate balance. A balance between conserving precious resources like food, fuel, and light, and the necessity of using them to survive. It's as a balance between the ever-present danger of the elements and the comforting warmth of human ingenuity and community. Their humble house, with its thatched roof, smoky fire, and earthen floor, might seem primitive to us, but it wasn't. It was the culmination of centuries of knowledge, of learning how to live in harmony with the seasons, not just against them. Every beam, every handful of daub, represented a lesson learned by their ancestors about how to survive the darkest, coldest time of the year. The medieval winter was undeniably harsh, a time of scarcity and danger, but it was also a time of deep community connection, of resourcefulness, and of finding warmth not just in the fire, but in each other. It reminds us that for much of human history, survival has been a team sport. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back in time. I hope it gave you a new appreciation for the warmth and light in your own home.